Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. With no ending in sight for Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the sudden eruption of hostilities in the Middle East, the global security environment has become even more challenging and complex. Will Israel's decisive action against Iran's nuclear ambitions have a broader impact on the region and beyond? And will Europe's resolve be sufficient to help Ukraine fight back against Moscow? Joining us here today is General Ben Hodges, former US Army commander in Europe. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Glad to have you with us today here on TVP World. And my first question is about the situation in the Middle East. Would you say that Israel's action against Iran has complicated matters somewhat for Iran's ally, Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think certainly this attack on Iran is demonstrating that Russia is not going to help Iran, that Russia is not a very reliable ally for the Iranian regime. So in a way, it does complicate things, but I don't know that Russia is as dependent on the Iranian Shahed drones anymore, for example, or other weapons. They've already figured out how to make them themselves. So complicated, yes, but it also demonstrates, once again, like Syria, the limits of Russian power.
Would you say there is a substantial spillover risk at this stage when it comes to the clash between Iran and Israel?
Well, it depends on how much damage was done to Iran. Here the first reports that the Israelis achieved a very significant effect against Iranian leadership, as well as their air defense and their apparently their nuclear program. I doubt that this is it. I imagine we'll see more successive attacks, different ways to try and complete the task that they started. And of course, the first Iranian response was significant but not overwhelming, and the Israelis, with American help, were able to stop most of it. So we'll see how this goes. The biggest sort of spillover I would see that would be of consequence would be the Houthis, if they resume their actions in the Red Sea, or if the Iranians somehow try to block traffic going in and out of the Straits of Hormuz. There could be some of that, but I think actually the Iranians are in big trouble. The government is, and they've got their hands full just dealing with what's at hand now.
Now, moving away from the Middle East and looking briefly at the congressional hearing of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, were you satisfied with the answers that he has given to the questions? He was being grilled on a variety of issues, including the reduced support for Ukraine, as well as NATO's Article 5.
Yeah, of course I'm not satisfied with that. He's terrible. There's arrogance and incompetence, and that's a bad combination, but that's what he is. And never, ever should an American Secretary of Defense hesitate on whether or not the United States would live up to our NATO obligations. I mean, that opens the door to Russian aggression, or from others, if they begin to perceive that the United States is not committed to its role as a member of NATO. So I was very disappointed, and I think it was clear from the reaction of the members of the Congress that were asking these questions. And I think, frankly, probably most Republican members of the Senate who are traditionally strong transatlanticists in the Senate and the House would have been very unhappy with his response. But of course, he takes his lead from the president, from the White House, and the fact that the White House has also been has waffled on some of these things, and Secretary Rubio's ridiculous congratulations to the Russian people on Russia Day. I mean, these are terrible signals to be sending to a country that has been our enemy or adversary for ever since the end of the Second World War.
Now, what implications could it have for the broader security environment? And also, do you really think that Russia could be trying to test the resolve of NATO anytime soon? There has been a lot of discussion about this, some reports sounding even quite alarmist. But what would you say is the real threat at this stage, bearing in mind the war in Ukraine still going on, and NATO also has new members, Sweden and Finland?
Well, of course, NATO got stronger the day that Finland and Sweden both joined, and NATO will be stronger the day that Ukraine finally joins the alliance. The biggest threat that we have is an unwillingness of our populations to acknowledge that Russia is a threat, that they're still, even in Poland and in some Baltic countries and across Europe and, of course, in Washington and in Canada, a reluctance to realize that Russia is at war with us. Even if it's not direct attack, not an Article 5 type scenario, the Russians are at war with us. They use all kinds of different means. We saw that the Russian Air Force intervened as Estonia was preparing to stop one of these illegal Russian Shadow Fleet oil tankers. So we should stop being naive and take seriously what Russia is trying to do. Their disruption operations that they're conducting in the Baltic region, for example, and in the Black Sea region. We should not be confused about who the bad guy is. But as long as people are unwilling to acknowledge that Russia is the aggressor, then we will not do the things that are necessary to effectively deter Russia. The best way to prevent a war with Russia is to make sure they know that we are ready and that we are not confused about their intentions.
So essentially what you're saying is that this messaging is directed at the populations, especially of Western Europe, in order to make them aware that this threat does exist. It didn't end with the conclusion of the Cold War. It is back, in fact. Or do you think there might be more to it? Do you think there might be an imminent threat of any military action on a larger scale against NATO? Because this is a question that many people keep asking ourselves in this day and age.
Well, the threat goes up with each day when the United States or other allies fail to do everything necessary to help Ukraine defeat Russia. The best way to prevent this from ever happening is for Ukraine to defeat Russia. If we don't have the will and are not willing to do what it takes to help Ukraine actually defeat Russia, then the Russians will see that we are not united, that we lack the will to do what's necessary, and then I think they feel emboldened to go further. So Moldova, for example, which is next to a NATO country, particularly Romania, the Romanians are not going to just sit back and wait for that to happen. And if they continue to move west in Ukraine, I don't think Poland is going to sit and hide behind the Vistula River. You can't do that. And so the risk goes up if Ukraine fails. So it's in our strategic interest that all of us help Ukraine, not this ridiculous for as long as it takes, but instead it should be with whatever it takes to help Ukraine defeat Russia. I think that the Russian objectives after Ukraine and after Moldova are to take over they talk openly about retaking Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Their ultimate objective, of course, still is and always has been not only the destruction of Ukraine as a state, but also to break our great alliance, to demonstrate that if they attack into a Baltic country, that maybe the rest of NATO will not show up, including the United States. That would mean the end of NATO. And I think they also want to make sure that the European Union collapses as well. So everything that they're doing is aimed towards those objectives, and we need to wake up and open our eyes and do what's necessary to prevent that.
So how can the European members of NATO actually ensure that Russia is deterred from ever trying to attack the Baltic states? These are small countries with little strategic depth. So the big question is there any sort of military deployment or strategy which would send a clear signal to Moscow, don't even try this, or you will regret it?
Well, number one, of course, is doing what we said we would do, all of us. The alliance has finally developed regional defense plans. So you've got plans, and countries like Poland are spending a lot of resources, investing resources into having the capabilities that are needed. But it's not just about equipment. It's about, are the populations ready? Are the populations prepared for what might happen? Are the women and men of the armed forces, are they trained and prepared? Do you have the ammunition that's needed? All of the stuff that makes up what we call readiness, that's the most important thing that we could possibly do, is demonstrate that we are prepared. Now that readiness, that preparation is not a destination, that's a journey. That's something that has to be worked on all the time. So exercising, growing the industrial base, improving our air and missile defense, improving the ability of alliance forces to move quickly across Europe before the crisis actually starts. These are the things that will signal to Russia that they would lose if they attacked, and it would be extremely costly for them if they ever attack. So that's how you prevent this from happening. But even before that, helping Ukraine defeat Russia, I think would be the best thing to ever prevent a conflict happening against NATO.
Do you think that NATO should emphasize the nuclear dimension more? Because we often talk about not escalating against Russia because it has nuclear weapons. Now, shouldn't Russia basically follow the same way of thinking? They should not escalate against NATO because it has nuclear weapons. What do you think should be done to improve the strategy and messaging in order for Russia to acknowledge that this is a red line, a serious one, that they should not ever attempt to cross?
So, of course, there should be universal condemnation against Russia, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, which almost on a weekly basis threatens other countries with a nuclear strike. Warsaw is often cited as a target. Now, we should also stop worrying so much about Russia's threats, because I think there is actually very little chance that they would ever use a nuclear weapon in any situation other than survival of the state, because there's no benefit for them if they use a nuclear weapon. Zero benefit for the Russians. And I think we made a huge mistake over the last couple of years of doing things to avoid escalation, which meant we stopped short of helping Ukraine when we could have helped Ukraine defeat Russia even 2 years ago. So the Russians see that we are vulnerable to their constant threats, and that's why they trot out Medvedev about every other week, or somebody else talks about a nuclear strike on London or Warsaw, or even when Putin says, I hope that it doesn't get to the situation where we have to use a nuclear weapon. This is utter nonsense, but it's part of their use of information to scare us and cause us to not do what we know needs to be done. So stop. The Russians, the only thing that provokes the Russians is our weakness. When they see that we're weak, then they will continue to escalate. That's been the story for since Putin came to power. The best way to stop them from doing that is to demonstrate that we're prepared and make it clear in no uncertain terms that yes, the United States, UK, France, all as part of the alliance, we have nuclear weapons also, and the price that Russia would pay would be far worse than anything they could ever do to us.
General Ben Hodges was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thanks for the privilege.
And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news, updates and commentary.